The Shift is brought to you by SE Healthcare. Welcome to The Shift. I'm Dr. Andrea Coyle. Shifties, welcome back to the next episode of the Shift podcast. Dr. Andrea Coyle here, and I'm joined by Dr. Hogan. Today, Dr. Hogan's going to talk to us about the benefits of mindfulness, the science behind mindfulness, and we're just going to learn and get really smart today. So, Dr. Hogan, welcome to the Shift podcast.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's lovely to be here and to be with all the shifties. There's nothing I like talking about more than mindfulness. So really excited to dig in together.
So, Michaela, I kind of messed this up. I typically try to do the introduction and tell everybody what your role is and what you're working on, but you have so much going on. Can you just make it down and dirty for all of us?
Sure. So I am a clinical assistant professor here at the University of Florida College of Nursing. I maintain a faculty practice in the Division of Child Adolescent Psychiatry, and my primary teaching appointment is in our DNP program, training the next generation of psychiatric mental health nurse practitioners. I teach 3 different psychotherapy courses as well as mentor quality improvement projects. And my scholarship program has focused largely on suicide risk reduction, but also post-pandemic has taken a focus of wanting to support healthcare workers and looking at their well-being overall.
See, I could have never done that introduction. It's so awesome. But you do such great work, and I'm fascinated by it. And obviously we'll have you come back and talk about different things that you're working on. For today, let's focus on the science behind mindfulness and the benefits. And you pick and choose, where do you want to start? Because it's a lot of great information.
It is a lot of information. I think first and foremost is just getting really clear on what we mean by mindfulness. I think that the health and wellness industry has taken the term and generated a lot of information around mindfulness. And so it's not always clear to the listener, the shifty, what exactly we mean with that term. And it is a broad umbrella term similar to exercise. So we talk about how exercise is good for your health. Are we referring to, taking a walk after dinner with the family, or are we talking about swimming 5 miles in the morning before work, and everything in between? And so the same is true for mindfulness. And what we find and what we have found over about 40 years of clinical research is that mindfulness is somewhat dose dependent, similar to exercise. And there are many different styles of practice when it comes to mindfulness. And so I think it bears, for the purposes of today, I think getting clear on what we mean by that is important. So when we refer to mindfulness, we're really talking about present moment awareness. And in the words of Jon Kabat-Zinn, so Jon Kabat-Zinn is actually in the Department of Psychology, developed the mindfulness-based stress reduction and at UMass back in 1979, early 80s, and was working in a stress reduction clinic at the time in the med school there. And he would classically define mindfulness as kind of awareness that arises through paying attention on purpose in the present moment, non-judgmentally. And so we find from that definition that there's actually some components that have to be present for us to be really mindful. And it's important to understand that kind of present moment awareness, because all of the benefits that we've attributed to mindfulness are really contingent upon us being mindfully aware of that present moment, and that it being an intentional, purposeful awareness.
The first thing I thought of is how difficult it is to be mindful in this age of artificial intelligence and technology and cell phones and do you have any suggestions on that? Because I'm guilty. I'll tell you, sometimes I'm sitting in a meeting and I'll look down at my phone and recognize that someone just sent me something from LinkedIn, and I'll I'm not present anymore. And what are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. So there are lots of kind of conditions and stimuli and causes that can kind of collect our awareness around an intended focal point. And there are lots of kind of influencers, so to speak, to borrow a social media term, that will scatter that awareness. And actually, in the program that I deliver, the mindfulness-based stress reduction, it's kind of a systematic training, developing formal and informal mindfulness skills. And we begin week one with developing what's called focused awareness. And there's a whole spectrum of awareness. Focused awareness is being able to attend to a single object or a single focal point on purpose, with fully collected attention. We might actually refer to this as concentration, right? So we're able to be dialed in, as the kids would say,
Yeah.
and concentrated on what we choose to concentrate on, for the duration that we would like to concentrate on it. So that's focused awareness. The other end of the spectrum, that we have kind of investigative awareness, we have open awareness, or some might refer to it as choiceless awareness. And then we actually have awareness of awareness itself, which is kind of this pure awareness state, and that's for advanced meditators. But in mindfulness-based stress reduction, we introduce focused awareness, and then gradually over time, we leverage that into kind of the investigative and the open awareness practices. But it's really difficult to access open awareness or even investigative awareness without kind of a baseline threshold of focused awareness.
So focused awareness, I'm just asking the question for my knowledge.
Sure.
Um, is that a choice?
Great question, and rather philosophical. So when we consider mindfulness, it's actually been described in like all of civilization's greatest works. So first by theologians, and then philosophers and psychologists, and now scientists. So any corpus of work where humanity was trying to describe what it is to be a human and how to go about living a good life, has described mindfulness. And whether or not mindfulness is a choice, absolutely is one of the questions that's written about at great lengths. And so, not a simple question to answer, but I will offer that focused awareness um, is, uh, for the beginner practitioner, is absolutely a choice. And I would refer to it as kind of a state. So, in psychology, we have states and we have traits. And for the beginner, focused awareness is going to be a state. So I can focus my attention for a period of time. And actually, much of the practice is being curious and kind when I become aware that focus has drifted. And so it's actually with that curiosity and that kindness that I redirect the focus back to the intended focal point. That's where the neuronal pathways that are being laid down that are actually causing, neuroplastic changes in the brain. That's where that beautiful work happens, is the gentle returning back to the object of attention. And so that process is absolutely deliberate. For the advanced practitioner, and by advanced, I mean we're talking like 20,000, 40,000 hours of meditation. These are people who have dedicated, 15 hours a day for years to meditation. For them, actually, some of the research would indicate that the focused attention and just open awareness has become more of a trait. And so it requires less effort for them to be focused and for them to be just aware of the present moment in kind of a continuous state. But that's not what most people are working to achieve.
Ooh, that sounds like a lot of hard work. I'm getting stressed out thinking about it, but it sounds awesome. Um, so my other question is, you know, it's obvious that mindfulness is really important, and I'm sure do people often compare it to emotional intelligence?
They're definitely adjacent. And I would say that mindfulness supports the development and cultivation of emotional intelligence. And we can, I
Okay.
could say that on both neurobiologically and psychologically, absolutely. When I think about, oh, go ahead.
Nope. Nope. Go ahead. I'm listening. I'm just excited to
Well,
ask
I
you
was going to
something.
define emotional intelligence because I do think it's important for the shifties out there to know, what am I referring to when I say that mindfulness supports EQ? And so emotional intelligence, as I'm speaking to it now, kind of refers to our ability to kind of self-reflect and identify what it is that we're feeling in the present moment. And then also kind of regulate those emotions as well as the ability to sense how you're feeling. So, and this is called theory of mind, and in psychology is kind of this idea for me to understand that you're your own person with your own emotional landscape, and then for me to be able to navigate between the two. How can I navigate this relationship, knowing what my internal landscape is, intuiting what your internal landscape is, and working collaboratively to kind of co-create an optimal interaction for both of us? That's emotional intelligence.
Well said. And thank you for that. Thank you for the
Definition.
clarifying that for everyone. It's important. So if you could think of a couple benefits, what are the benefits of mindfulness? Number one, as it relates to a nurse in the practice environment. And can you be mindful when you're actively doing tasks?
Yes, we can absolutely be mindful. And I would actually say that we deliver safer, more compassionate care when we're able to bring a measure of mindfulness to the task. Mindfulness is really kind of a way of being. Well, nursing care is really focused on a lot of doing. But as we train our minds in a routine mindfulness practice, we begin to integrate it into kind of these informal practices, which are just kind of the tasks of daily life. And so I would offer that kind of the doing of being a nurse can absolutely be infused with mindfulness. And that was my experience as a new nurse many years ago. And that's what's really inspired me to bring mindfulness to nurses, because I experienced a true transformation in terms of my capacity to be really present in what seemed to be kind of um, a state of almost helplessness in the face of so much patient suffering. And so when confronted with that, you, we have a few options. And the options that I was offered by my preceptors at the time didn't really resonate. And so I went looking for my own options. And so I think some healthcare workers or nurses respond to that kind of, we can't heal everyone that we want to heal. And some of our patients pass away, and some of our patients suffer greatly despite our best efforts to provide comfort and care and healing. I worked in oncology, and so there was a lot of long suffering for many patients that we began to become close to in a way when we would see them, once a month for a week, over 9 months, 12 months, 18 months, and their families would come to the clinic, and, you begin to develop ongoing professional relationships with these folks. And so, and then when ultimately, unfortunately, they succumb to their illness, can feel very purposeless in what we're doing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that in the context of COVID and kind of post-pandemic, a lot of nurses are left needing to make meaning out of all of the work that they did to help others, despite the sense of almost not quite hopelessness, but certainly powerlessness, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you had asked about the benefits of mindfulness. So kind of shifting gears and thinking about the science, actually thinking about Richard Davidson, who's an eminent scientist studying mindfulness out of the University of Wisconsin, and really difficult to even speak to the science around mindfulness without mentioning his name. And so um, he, he actually added quite a bit to the corpus of literature and the neuroscience literature around mindfulness, and particularly looking at the brains of long-term meditators and kind of novice or beginner meditators. And things that he found in terms of the neuroplasticity is that, mindfulness meditation absolutely increases the volume of gray matter, particularly in the hippocampus and temporoparietal regions. And what that means is that memory improves, learning improves, self-awareness improves, empathy and compassion improve. He also identified that mindfulness strengthens certain neuronal pathways. And so we see that with longer term mindfulness practice, the connection between our prefrontal cortex, which if this were our brain and this is our forehead here, so the prefrontal cortex is up here, our amygdala is back here at the base of the brain. Prefrontal cortex, of course, is like the executive functioning, so the decision making, the planning, the weighing of pros and cons, impulse control,
Mhm.
all of the kind of critical thinking that needs to go on to be a successful citizen in our society. And then the amygdala is kind of the crisis protection center, and the hippocampus is between those two. And so hippocampus lays down memory, emotional memory, in response to different stimuli. And so as we see that the connections between the prefrontal cortex and these other regions of the brain is strengthened and improved, what that ends up becoming is just kind of increased mental control, increased emotional regulation, and psychological balance. So a stimulus arises, a patient has a code. My finely tuned nervous system is able to mobilize all of the resources I need to think quickly, make safe and effective decisions, run the code. And then because the nervous system is finely tuned from my mindfulness practice, my heart rate is able to return to baseline much faster than my colleague who doesn't have a mindfulness practice that helps their heart rate return to baseline much faster. And so we see things like decreased cortisol, improved heart rate variability, as well as a shift in kind of the chronic stress response. So, of course, the amygdala is involved in kind of that immediate, like there's a code, we need to manage it. And that's the autonomic nervous system kind of takes over and we go into fight or flight. Well, when we get exposed to a code every couple of hours for a 12-hour shift for weeks and months, what
Mhm.
happens is that we go from kind of this immediate stress response to more of a chronic stress response. And that's mediated by the HPA axis. It's the hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenal cortex complex. And what that means is that cortisol increases. And with increased cortisol, we see things like hypertension, decreased immune response, diabetes, right? So, like all of these chronic illnesses, metabolic disorders that come out of chronic stress. And what we've found is that meditation can absolutely mediate that stress response. I've gotten super technical here, so pull me back out of the science and let's talk mindfulness if you'd like.
Um, no, that was so I was an adult ICU nurse, and I'm thinking to myself, I wonder if there's a study out there that looks at nurses that were on rapid response teams and did they have higher case of diabetes, hypertension, obesity versus those who weren't on the rapid response team but still worked in the ICU? Or you could create and make the study however you want, but that is just really fascinating information. And I hope ICU nurses are listening to this. I really do. Can you, make the connection for the benefits of mindfulness and then burnout? Because, SE Healthcare, we're a burnout prevention program. I'm just wondering if you could share with the shifties how mindfulness can decrease potentially burnout. And then if you could just share with us some good news, what you have going on with mindfulness and how we can create some more awareness. So those are two questions. Sorry, I combined them both.
No, absolutely. I think it's great. And I didn't one kind of neurobiological benefit of mindfulness I didn't touch on, which relates to this, and that's the default mode network, which is a network of different regions in the brain that activates, it like lights up anytime that we're engaged in like rumination, worry, kind of like when you're physically present but mentally absent because your mind is on the hamster wheel.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so what we find is that folks who have a meditation practice actually down-regulate the default mode network, which means less rumination, less worry. And when we see that network is overactive or dysregulated, that correlates with anxiety, depression, and things like that can relate to and contribute to burnout. And so particularly, when we think about burnout, we think about kind of constant exposure to stress, kind of
Mm-hmm.
overworked, potentially under-challenged, but certainly there being this aspect of kind of moral injury. And I kind of alluded to this earlier, where you're just showing up and like the tide keeps coming in, like you are
Yeah.
giving all of your resources and sacrificing some of your personal resources, likely like coming in on holidays, missing birthdays, whatever the case may be, exposing yourself to a high degree of risk, particularly, when we're thinking about burnout in relation to kind of post-pandemic and everything that the nurses went through to get us through the pandemic. Um, and so mindfulness, I think, creates some space between this is my experience and creates enough space for me to then have a response. Whereas when we don't have that space, we're in reactivity. And so the psychological balancing that goes on with mindfulness is kind of like, okay, in this moment, this problem is arising, and I can be present with it without reacting, without making a judgment or a conclusion. So my patient coded and the team wasn't able to save the patient. That's what happened. Without the judgment of what I could have, should have, would have done, or what someone else maybe should have, could have, would have done, right? Um, and it also, so the mindfulness practice, in addition to kind of creating that space to allow for there to be a response versus a reaction, as well as kind of cultivating the pathways in the brain that move to kind of this acceptance and allowing versus kind of aversion, judging, blocking. Um,
Mm-hmm.
um, there's this opportunity um, to I'm trying to so the psychological balance in terms of how that relates to kind of it's like processing. Another word we might say is like digesting or metabolizing. But when you get really quiet and when you sit with your breath, what arises in that moment are all of the things that haven't been given time or space to arise in your conscious awareness throughout the day. And to be a floor nurse and to continually think patient first for 12 hours after so many shifts, after so many weeks, after so many years, under conditions where maybe you feel under-resourced, under-supported, contending with lateral violence, all of the things that we know that go on in healthcare. This is time and space for you to be with everything that was asked to wait so that you could put the patient first, or you could put the team first, or you could put even family partner first, right? And so what usually ends up happening in the first phase of a mindfulness practice is there's just a lot of the friending. And by that, I mean, it's like what comes up, I see, I sense, I feel it in my body, I know it, right? And the first emotion I befriended in my mindfulness practice was anxiety. And prior to my mindfulness practice, anxiety was something that was just very unwelcome in my consciousness because I saw it as, a weakness that could somehow, maybe negatively affect my presence as a nurse on the floor. And
So,
so,
Michaela, can I give an example? Because I'm
yes,
thinking about this. And tell me
Yeah.
if this is what it is. I'm just going back into the days when I was an adult med search. I was 25 years old. I had 5 patients, and it's that feeling of being overwhelmed because every patient is asking, a call light's going on, someone needs an antibiotic, someone, the family wants to speak to you, the phone's ringing, you have a physician that wants to speak to you. And when you have mindfulness, are you able to slow down, take a deep breath, instead of feeling torn those 4 or 5 different directions and becoming so overwhelmed that you react in a way that's not healthy or helpful? When you have mindfulness, you're able to take a breath and say, you're able to prioritize and say, you know what, this can wait. And when you're being asked so many things in
Mhm.
healthcare, you're able to maybe set boundaries a little bit better. And that can help with burnout. Does that make sense? Did I capture it kind of?
Absolutely. I think that the spaciousness to prioritize, to set boundaries is definitely more accessible. I also think that there's really, in psychology, we talk about kind of top-down approaches and bottom-up approaches, top-down being kind of cognitive behavioral interventions. Mindfulness has attributes of cognitive behavioral therapy. It also has attributes of what we call the bottom-up approaches, which are like somatic experiencing therapies. And so what happens with mindfulness, in addition to creating that space where you can prioritize and communicate and set boundaries, is that it's actually working out your nervous system. The way that lifting weights strengthens your muscles,
Mm-hmm.
mindfulness strengthens your nervous system. And so that bottom up approach is it's kind of shifting out of the sympathetic kind of chronic stress response, right? We know that the chronic stress response actually communicates with the sympathetic nervous system so that our heart rate is higher, we have elevated blood pressure, all of these things on a physiological level. Um, and so it shifts us into the parasympathetic, the rest and digest, right?
I
And
love
so
it.
engaging in mindfulness 20 minutes a day, and the consistency actually matters more than the duration when we look at the evidence. And so it's 20 minutes a day 5 or 6 days a week is more impactful than an hour a day once a week. So consistency is so important, but it's working out your nervous system. And so really causing a bottom up physiological change that gives you access to kind of that psychological balance, that spaciousness to be able to make your decisions and prioritize and respond to situations instead of react.
I love that. Respond versus react. Um, I have to tell you, I'm so interested and intrigued by all of this. And you and I were having discussion offline, and I found out that starting October 1st, you're going to be offering some mindfulness. So will you tell the shifties a little bit about it? Because I'm sure
Absolutely.
they want to hear.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. So I'm offering an 8-week mindfulness training called Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction, developed by John Kabat-Zinn. I mentioned him earlier. Trained at Brown University to be able to provide this to nurses. And it's actually the mindfulness course that I initially took as a new nurse that gave me this skill and capacity to kind of navigate the healthcare landscape. And so I feel really passionate about bringing it to nursing, and I feel exceedingly passionate about offering it as a gift to
Thank you
nurses.
so much.
Yeah.
And what we'll do is we'll share this so that shifties have the opportunity. It's an 8 week. Did you say it's 8 weeks?
Yes, so it's an 8-week course. It's about 2.5 hours each week. It's online, synchronous. There are some homework assignments which are really just mindfulness practice, guided mindfulness practices. And there's also an all-day retreat that, again, is online via Zoom that involves a lot of guided practice over a 6-hour period. This is an evidence-based mindfulness training course, and so there's about 40 years worth of research that demonstrates its effectiveness in establishing mindfulness practice, and then all sorts of benefits, decreased anxiety, improved mood, overall increased psychological well-being, as well as decreased stress. And so we're also offering 23 CEs for nurses who
That
complete.
That is amazing. So Shifties, please make sure you sign up, ask your friends to sign up. It's really helpful. And Dr. Hogan, I just want to say, I'm so thrilled that we met. I want to remind everyone that we're going to have a webinar with myself, Dr. Jamie, Dr. Michaela Hogan, and we're going to talk a little bit different subject, not mindfulness, but we're going to talk about mental health and suicide in healthcare. So Dr. Hogan, thank you again for your skill, your knowledge. This is interesting stuff. It's great work. And Shifties, remember, your shift makes a difference. Keep shifting. Enjoying the shift? Help us reach more nurse leaders by rating and reviewing us on your podcast app. It takes just a minute, but makes a big impact. Search for The Shift, tap those stars, and share what you love. Your feedback shapes our future episodes and helps others discover us. Remember, rate, review, and amplify the shift today.